I have some clients that have opened wellness centers and gyms to extend the physical therapy to kind of a health journey overall, and products and services. So there's all sorts of things to expand the lifetime value of that client beyond just the physical therapy part.
Meet Jennifer Frigault, the founder of Spire Vision Leadership, an ICF-certified coach and an executive leader with over 20 years of experience in leading high-performing data teams and projects at large-scale digital companies.
You need business level objectives that everybody aligns to. And the data really help facilitate that.
That's where visualizations can really help tie all of it together and being able to understand when this part changes or is upgraded, it impacts it in this way.
I mean, do you see issues around the ability to even do strategic things like expanding services that are much more difficult and challenged than they should be because the core business itself really isn't in order?
It's a great question, and whether it's a physical therapist or any other kind of business, my first question is going to be,
hey, it's Bob here with Rehabbing Your Revenue Cycle, and real happy today to have a guest. Her name's Jennifer Frigault, and Jennifer is a very interesting person because she comes from the data world first. She was Senior Vice President of Data Strategy and Analytics for a big company called Gannett owns USA Today. They're a big media marketing company. They're in the billions, right? So it was a big job to be in charge of data strategy and analytics for a really big company. So her roots and background come from data. Today, she's helping business owners navigate complex issues, strategies, challenges that they deal with in their own individual industries and businesses. And there's certainly a big connection there between how business owners strategically look at their business and plan for ultimate objective of maximizing the value of the business, which is a combination of, scale and differentiation and all kinds of other things. But to be in a position of helping business owners essentially have a better business, right, needs to be connected to an understanding of data as well. So it's a really interesting evolution that she's gone through. Jennifer and I do work together. She's very familiar with my two companies, our revenue cycle services company and the data company, that I've started. And so we do work together. She's got familiarity with what we're doing with revenue cycle, the physical therapy, occupational therapy, general industry, and what the nature of that kind of business is. We do have some other common clients, practice owners, that we both service. So she is directly involved with this specific specialty within healthcare. And, just real happy to have a conversation around the importance of data. That's really what this topic is about, and how data should be used to drive decision making, to drive strategy, to drive planning, to drive problem solving, right? There's just so many different places where the data needs to be the foundation for these things. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So is there anything you'd like to share about your background or anything beyond what I've said, just to give people a little orientation to who we are?
No, I think you did an amazing job with that intro. Thank you. I'm excited to put my data hat back on for our talk today. You mentioned I had this big role at Gannett, which is true. And just to kind of break it down for those listening, that included data analytics around product, marketing. I had data science, research and insights, which is also a component of data, and also data visualization. So being able to create dashboards and reporting capabilities to kind of decipher and understand that data and make it much more accessible and actionable to the whole company. So that's a large part of what I did.
So why would a company that's already in the billions care that much about data?
Well, I don't know that they would be in the billions if they didn't care about data. So we can start there. And Gannett was an interesting evolution. It's a media company, but it started off on the print side. So they owned, newspapers all over the country. And then slowly they evolved into creating websites and creating mobile platforms, and then social media and video and all the different kind of digital evolution that a lot of companies went through. And with that came different needs for data, starting with what are the people coming to our website doing. We didn't even know who they were, but what were the behavior patterns from there? How much ad revenue did that generate every time they came to the website? So basic all the way to, when I left a few years ago, it was getting very into kind of predictive modeling. Is what are some of the investments that we should be doing? How do we look at customer churn patterns to make sure that we can get ahead of it? How do we convert print customers to digital customers in their life cycle journey? Like all those types of questions. So I was kind of there for the evolution of all of that, which was pretty exciting and kept me there so long.
Yeah, and there's a lot of application for that logic in healthcare and in patient care, right? And
Yeah.
you're building in terms of relationships with patients and trust and reputation and how you go about doing that. And so you're also very much involved in strategy around marketing and those types of things, even for healthcare practices.
Yes, very much so when I was at Gannett, but you mentioned kind of some of the clients we have in common. That's one of the things I'm working on with them is just how are we getting patients in the door from a marketing perspective? What are the channels? What's the customer acquisition cost? What's the funnel conversion all the way from the initial outreach all the way through them actually booking the service? And then once we have them in the door, how are we keeping them? What does their lifetime value look like from a financial perspective? So I know you kind of deal with things on the revenue cycle side, and I'm kind of work with the other pieces. So it can be pretty compelling when you put that all together.
I'm going to take a couple minutes here to kind of present my view of our industry's primary business problem.
Okay.
And there's a few different, pieces and drivers of all this, but the biggest issue in physical therapy, and I'm going to keep saying physical therapy, but a lot of physical therapy also has occupational therapy, even some speech therapy. So depending upon their scale and structure, there's a lot of overlap between those. But physical therapy is our primary, you know, service, that, the industry that we're in. And I am a physical therapist, right? I did have a private practice. So, now I'm in the business of helping private practice owners basically improve the value of their business, right? And so revenue cycle, you mentioned that is my space. In the simplest form, revenue cycle is everything that impacts if, when, or how much you're paid, right?
Mhm.
So the problem that we have is physical therapy is not of high value service in terms of financial value, right? The average patient visit in the United States right now is about 90, in the low $90 range, somewhere between 90 and 95. And the payer world is driving that value down. They want to and are paying less over time. And so there's a combination of things that are happening through payer policy. Like Medicare has reduced what they pay physical therapists 3% a year for the last, I think, 4 years now consecutively. So Medicare's down 10, 12, 13%. In fact, the math modeling that Medicare uses to determine what the value of physical therapy visits, what the value is, that formula that they use values physical therapy today less than it was 25 years ago. And in the last 25 years, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the cost of about everything else has gone up, right? So, except what the relative on a relative value, what therapists are paid has actually declined, right? And so the biggest business problem in our industry is low profit margin, right? We're under tremendous pressure, downward pressure on what payers are paying,
Mhm.
structural change in the payer mixes themselves, the migration from Medicare to Medicare replacement plans, Medicare Advantage, all that pays less. So the business model that we're in depends on third-party payment for the services that provided. And the payer world has got downward pressure on us in terms of what they're willing to pay. With that, there's a lot more complexity in getting paid, right? So not only are you converting time into cash at a lower rate, but the difficulty in converting time to cash is much higher than it's ever been. So that's a kind of a double whammy, right? Complexity's up, willingness to pay is down, and our costs keep rising, right? So physical therapists coming out of school today, they get paid more money than when I came out of school, right? So
Mhm.
cost side is the pressures are pushing that up. The revenue side, the pressures are pushing that down. And what's in the middle is profit margin. And the squeeze is huge. It's just a big squeeze, right, against margins. So margins, we're not in a business that we can just raise pricing, right?
Mhm.
We're not selling Snickers bars. We're going to charge an extra 10 cents for a candy bar, right? And the consumer,
Right. Because it's determined on what they're willing to pay.
you know, we're the proverbial between a rock and a hard place, right? We
Yeah.
can't just raise pricing, and our cost pressures are up. So it's about margin. And there's a lot of interesting things and business strategies going on. There's a lot more of a shift going to cash services, doing things that insurances don't pay for, right? To increase revenue streams through different pathways and things like that, which is all great stuff. But the core business, right, is a very difficult business to be in these days. And this is where revenue cycle comes in, right? So again, revenue cycle, everything that affects if, when, and how much you're paid. And so it's essentially every function, every process, every task that's done in a physical therapy practice is part of the revenue cycle. And it's under the umbrella of revenue cycle management. And what I tell practice owners all the time is you are a revenue cycle business that does physical therapy for revenue. And you need to think like a revenue cycle company, not just like a patient services provider, right? So where we fit into the picture is, what providers do for a living in the simplest form is they convert their time into potential revenue. What the revenue cycle functions do, credentialing, authorization management, verification of benefits, patient registration, the billing process, your systems, your EMR, your practice management platform, the billing software, the clearinghouse, all these that are part of this business determine how well you convert potential revenue to cash.
Mhm.
And so revenue cycle, I believe, is the most underutilized strategy today for maximizing within the structural limits that exist the amount of revenue that's available for your conversion of time to potential revenue. So we want to convert time to the highest potential revenue. Then we want to capture all that potential revenue. We want to get it as quickly as we can and as cost effectively as we can. And to do all that, you need a lot of data. And you need different data than what the healthcare world in general is really even focused on, right? So I want to talk about how a business, in our case, right, it's a revenue cycle type of business, really understands what kind of data it needs in the first place, because data is foundational for all decision making, all strategy, all focus areas, all planning, all everything. And what I believe is behind the problem of squeezed margins and the structural challenges that we have is that we're not the level of sophistication as business owners is far behind where it needs to be in order to deal with a very challenging business environment and still be successful. And
Mhm.
from a marketing perspective, you need to scale profitable units, right? So the value of a visit, the value of a patient, in a plan of care, the lifetime value of a patient. You have to be optimized so that those are maximized within your structures. And scaling on that actually makes a lot of sense. Scaling a 2% profit margin is a very, very difficult thing to do and doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to succeed. You have to maximize the value of the parts of the business and ultimately what you need to scale. And so what I find is that the data that exists in the industry is just way off target for helping practice owners understand what they need to about their business so that they can create a more financially stable and more scalable business. And that's essentially what we do with our with Ascend Solutions and our data platform is we convert everyday functions that people do into business intelligence, and how that data and information allows us to focus on where there's opportunities to optimize and improve to create a better business. Essentially, better data leads to better process, which leads to better outcome, which leads to a better business. So that's the business that we're in. And I believe it's super important that our industry, our practice owners start to rethink how they go about strategically trying to grow and have successful businesses, and where data really fits into that whole picture.
Yeah. And to me, it's kind of the whole client journey. So you're sitting very squarely, from what I see, in the middle of the person's already come in, now they're in the system and we're billing them. And how are you making that more efficient and more profitable for your clients? And so I sit on kind of the bookends of that, of really using data to understand how are we even getting people in the door, because it's not just doctor referrals, anymore. It's word of mouth, it's social media, it's Facebook ads. Like, there's a lot that goes into it's educational series of getting people to just understand how they should be thinking about physical therapy and their health, and getting them to realize they might, want to go to their doctor and discuss some of this. So there's all those components of getting them in the door. And then when we get them, how do we maximize their visit value and their lifetime value? And so the pressures of the insurance companies and the payment is very real. So working with my clients on, okay, well, how are we maximizing those visits that you do get? Are we increasing the number of visits? Are we utilizing the visits differently? And that could look, many different ways that you can utilize the visit differently. And then what are some additional things that you can add to increase their value? I have some clients that have opened wellness centers and gyms to, extend the physical therapy, into kind of a health journey overall, and products and services. So there's all sorts of things to expand the lifetime value of that client beyond just the physical therapy part. But that's where data comes in. That's where testing comes in. You have to test out these concepts. You have to look at the data that you get and see what's really moving the needle and not. So data plays a very important role in the whole journey. And you're a big part of that journey. And then I think the other pieces are also a big part of the journey to give the clients that whole picture.
Expanding the scope of what you do, right, as a strategy for growing a business. Talk about, in my view, the core business has to be super solid and stable before you start going out and experimenting, right, with other ways to try to create revenue. I mean, do you see issues around the ability to even do strategic things like expanding services, and that are much more difficult and challenged than they should be because the core business itself really isn't in order?
It's a great question. And whether it's a physical therapist or any other kind of business, my first question is going to be, it needs to be a natural extension, a natural evolution of the client's journey. So you can't, for instance, be a physical therapist and then say, I'm going to, offer protein bars for sale. Like, that seems tangential, but it's like a little odd, right? That doesn't make sense. But a wellness center, or some of the tools used in the physical therapy session that they're using with their physical therapist, to now be able to purchase and have like a personalized plan of continued care once they kind of graduate from physical therapy and now they're doing this at home. That's a natural part of the client's journey. Like, a lot of clients I know with physical therapy, I've been a client myself, they go through it and they get to the point where they stop, but some have a need to have kind of continued care. And we're looking it up on YouTube, or, just depends on who we go to, of, do we have the right tools and equipment? Am I getting it off Amazon? Most likely. Or can I actually get it from the provider? So that's what I mean by natural extension.
I'm going to give you a couple of data points that we have that are very unique. I mean, we have a lot of proprietary data that's not even available to the industry. We are starting to do benchmarking and things on new metrics that are way more meaningful than traditional information that practices get out of their EMR or the billing software. So the revenue cycle kind of context for how we're trying to optimize, use data to improve process to get better outcomes, business outcomes, right? And outcome could be, we could take the context of patient care itself. We could take the context of our cost basis or how we're creating revenue or how we're optimizing our payer mix to get the opportunity to create more revenue, or how we're coding differently and combinations and what the distribution of codes are. And in physical therapy, there's a way over utilization of 97110, which is therapeutic exercise. It's the lowest value code from the payers, what they're willing to pay, essentially, yet it's the most commonly billed code in the industry. And so we get into coding optimization. So there's many, many processes and many, many things that ultimately can be driven by the right data. So data driving better process means better outcomes means better business, right?
Mhm.
So we have quantified, what we do is we quantify time. So I'm going to probably scare people a little bit in that I'm maybe at a crazy extreme of what we do with data related to, physical therapy practices. But from where I sit, what I know, and I believe is a fact, is that the single most important metric that any practice can have is the efficiency of its billing operation. And most people would go, they can't see how that, really is. But the fact is that the billing process itself is affected by every single revenue cycle function that there is. So your credentialing process, your authorization management, doing verification of benefits, registering your patients, the accuracy of the information that you get from that, the quality of the documentation, how does it support the coding that you are billing out, the modifiers that are used, your payers that you're working with, the complexity that the payer brings to the process of getting paid. All of these things, the software you're in, the billing software you use, the EMR, how well does the EMR support billing software? What's the clearinghouse? How many moving parts can you centralize through a great clearinghouse, where without a great clearinghouse in place, you're going into dozens, if not hundreds, of different payer portals, the efficiency of all that. Every single thing that's a day-to-day function that occurs that impacts if, when, and how much you're paid affects your biller.
Not all equally, correct? In
Not all
different.
equally, no, but they all affect the biller.
Okay.
So because that's true, and this is what we've done, is we've documented billing time to the minute on millions of claims across 50 different billing tasks. And we're able to correlate the time inflation that occurs at the task level based on external things that drive time up. So in our business environment, being very challenged with downward pressure on payment, upward pressure on cost, efficiency is absolutely the thing that has to be, in front of mind, right? When you're in tight margin business models with those pressures, opposing pressures, squeezing margin, it is all about efficiency and productivity and getting more value for time from every way that time is spent, right, throughout the entire system. So what we've come up with is a way to do basically time analytics. We are in the business of understanding all the complexities that exist that drive time up. And if your billing process time is being driven up, then you create an imbalance between billing time supply and billing time demand, and your accounts receivables grow because you're not able to get through all the work, and this perpetuates itself. And so what we've come up with is a way to convert the day-to-day processes that people already do into business intelligence data that explains how well all those processes are working in the context of revenue cycle objectives, getting all your money, getting it fast, getting it cost effectively. So we have data on every client we've ever worked with. If I take our lowest efficiency clients, meaning they're the highest time demand on a volume basis per unit, so we normalize everything to a per visit level. The time variance from our most optimized, most dialed in, most efficient clients to our least in the billing process is a 400% increase in the overall amount of time spent, comparing high complexity practices to low complexity practices. If we dial this down into really specifics, and I'm not going to go into all 50 tasks, but the accounts receivables management, the denial management part of billing is probably the most important function in billing because it's the thing that converts the claims that would not be paid, into being payable. And if you're in a 5, 6, 10% margin business, you don't have a whole lot of tolerance for claims that are not converting to cash, right? So you have to work your AR. But the time demand, when I look at this strictly in terms of AR management and denial management and accounts receivables, we compare that high complexity group to the low. The time variance per visit is 4,060% increase in time. So the revenue cycle business is all about identifying, quantifying, monitoring preventable complexities. And complexity is created almost everywhere throughout the whole healthcare business, right? The number one most common source of time inflation in the billing process is patient registration. They don't collect the right insurance. They registered a patient with the primary and secondary, and they put the secondary as primary, or they didn't get the secondary, and the patient gave them an insurance card that's been expired for 2 years and they didn't check it properly, or the address is wrong, and on and on and on. There's just tons and tons and tons of information, right, that's collected. And so what we've come up with is a way to quantify all of these points. So we track 260 different ways that complexity is added into the system through human errors and omissions, so that we can start with a baseline understanding of how well every process and every function in a practice is performing to support revenue objectives. That's valuable data.
How are you showing that to the client?
We have an output that summarizes it all, and we organize it by top down. And so that's what drives our collaboration with the clients. We first have to start with identifying where all of the opportunities exist to optimize process so that we can improve cash flow. And so my business problem being in the revenue cycle business was the tremendous time variance on a per unit basis that existed from one client to another, and being able to understand what creates that time variance. Most people just think, well, my biller's slow or my biller doesn't know what they're doing. When in fact, it's got nothing to do with the biller. We've quantified millions of claims and the sources of all revenue challenges that have been created from every function and process that exists in a practice. And 96% of all of it is external to billing. Yet the current understanding of the industry is, well, I must have a billing problem. Now you have a process optimization problem, which means you have a data problem because your data does not point you to where you really have root causes of things that are going on that are holding your business back. And so the foundation of all of this is having the right data.
Right, because they might be their gut reaction that the biller themselves might be spot on, but what's the root cause, to your point, underneath of that is, why is that biller so slow? Is it truly, acumen, lack of understanding of the role, or is it because they have the wrong insurance data or whatever? So Okay, so you've got all that data, you're exposing it to the client, and then are you then tracking it to see the changes that are made from that initial discovery within their practice to start to see the impact?
Yeah. And so that's where, where this all goes is, which is also connects to kind of what you do today with business owners, is you essentially look at where there's opportunities. You get into their business, you say, well, these are the things that we need to address. And common business coaching kind of language is you got to have focus areas. Your focus areas need action plans. Action plans are who's going to do what by when in order to change some condition, right? But all of this is based on the need to have data, right? To have data that if you're going to go and implement strategies to change things, you have to have the right data to even know that change occurred, the change that you wanted to occur.
Right.
So we use the data to then tee up, where the opportunities are to improve process, to reduce overall amounts of complexity in the system so that there's less chance that you're not going to get paid. It condenses the calendar days that it takes to get paid, and it reduces the cost to get paid. In our model, as our efficiency goes up, typically the cash flow goes up, unless there's some crazy payer mix that just no matter what you do is never going to pay you a dollar more. Those do exist. But, as the efficiency of the billing operation gets better, the cash flow is also getting better. The time to pay is decreasing. We have all kinds of case studies on things. The driver, though, for optimizing the value of a physical therapy practice is in complexity reduction. We really have to reduce complexities and simplify the process of getting paid, essentially, and eliminate preventable sources of complexities. And as you do that, and the efficiency, this is why I say the most important metric of all is the efficiency of your billing operation, because and we define efficiency by visits per FTE. Some practices are at 300 visits per FTE in their billing. Some are at 5,000. What's the difference? That's a tremendous difference. Literally, you're saying that for in one case, and 5,000 is super high, okay, but even if we went from 300 to 3,000, right?
Over what time period?
Yeah, that's a 10x change, right? So, but what I'm saying is that we quantify all of these complexities and the time at the task level to know what the efficiency of every moving part is. And our efficiencies vary by a factor of overall basis by as much as 10 times. On individual task levels, those efficiencies can vary as much as 4,000%, 40 times. And so we have to understand what drives time, right? It's still about humans spending time doing things, though that's changing with AI. And that could be a whole nother conversation. But if you're looking at AI integrations as a strategic plan for helping solve inefficiencies, you need AI focused on where the real inefficiencies lie, and most people don't even understand where that is. So, but we're connecting all the dots between what everybody does throughout the entire business, how it supports revenue objectives, right? You got to have cash flow in order to be in business. So it's a completely different kind of data. The drivers of things that create revenue risks also inflate biller time. Revenue cycle management is all about creating balance between billing time demand and billing time supply. The entire revenue cycle world, except us, is focused on controlling time supply. They have artificial time supply control models. They have fixed time supply models. We're in the time demand business. We're trying to define and understand billing time demand and reduce time demand. That solves the problem. So it's a whole different kind of approach that all comes from data that was created to solve a foundational problem, which is tremendous variance and efficiency from one provider, one practice, to another in terms of helping, get them paid. So we're a living example of how focusing on data leads from one thing to another, and ultimately, in my case, created a whole nother business.
Yeah. And, to your point of creating action plans and focus time, that can be a frustrating part of this process. And you're kind of providing data, and the way that I'm providing data in a different aspect. It's one thing to provide the data and shine the light on what the issue is, but then the provider, the client, has to actually take action to affect change. So that's the second part of the process, is helping them to take the right actions and then measuring the results of that action.
And that's what you do today.
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine that's what you need to do kind of as an evolution in your work with clients too.
Yeah, there's nothing more frustrating to me, though it's very common, to paint the right picture with the right data to identify all of the problems and where all the opportunities for optimization and improvement lie, yet the reality never changes.
Yes.
It's how you go from data telling you what needs to be fixed to actually fixing it, right?
Yes.
To actually optimizing, to actually changing process, to, and to have the right kinds of systems in place and the controls in place, the data, in place to know, what's actually changing. And so we see problem number one, a tremendous shortfall and lack of the right data to really run these businesses from. And then we see tremendous variance in ability, maybe it's willingness, I don't know, but ability to actually drive change, right? To actually improve process, to actually get people to produce a different outcome. And at that point, this just brings to mind one of the problems with the structures of these businesses is that there's lots of different moving parts, lots of different people doing different tasks and processes and functions, and they have no clue how they affect each other. I call them functional silos, right? The functional silos are the norm. It's like the patient registration has no clue how it affects the biller. The credentialing has no clue how it affects the biller. The clinical, the provider, the therapist has no clue how they affect the credentialing, or there's just these disconnected functional silos. And the other thing that the right data does is it's just super powerful at connecting teams, people that have different functions around a common perspective and view on how everything's actually working. You need business level objectives that everybody aligns to, right? And the data, really, really helps facilitate that.
Yeah, and that's where visualizations can really help, tie all of it together, and being able to understand when this part changes or is upgraded, it impacts it in this way. We dealt with that a lot of at Gannett, as you can imagine, the marketing side, what the newsroom was doing, what pricing was given, like all the things that were happening in the ecosystem. And we're just trying to look at what's driving customer churn when all these different pieces are happening. So we had to get very good at combining the data, overlaying the data, visualizing the data so that everyone could understand in an easy way.
Yeah, and then that's the hard part. I think data can be overwhelming and
Yeah.
complicated, and too much data, right? Even if it's the right data, can be just not consumed, right? It doesn't actually create the change that, that's needed, because you're not sure how to translate it all. And that's probably the biggest problem that I have, is we're on the side of probably having too much data, ending up in certain cases in analysis paralysis, right? And how do you really consume data in the right amounts, the right time, in the right view, right? The right packaging of information. That's our next evolutionary, phase, is how we get a lot better at telling the story that data is telling.
Yes. Yes. Storytelling is a big component of this, and one I think your clients are really going to welcome.
Yeah. Any other just kind of general thoughts or things that you think a physical therapy practice owner, a revenue cycle, person in charge of revenue cycle in a healthcare practice, any parting words of wisdom, for what's important in today's business environment when you have the role of a business owner? To me, the number one metric for a business owner is what's your company worth, and a lot of moving parts that ultimately determine that.
Yeah, I mean, I see the evolution of kind of what you're doing on the revenue cycle side evolving to have more visibility into the marketing side, what's driving people in the door, and then what's the, how are they what's their journey, with that provider. So understanding those levers, I know it's not billing related, but it does tie together. If you have an influx of new patients, what does that do to the time per visit number and things like that? So I do see an evolution coming where maybe those are more tied together a little bit.
Yeah, they definitely are. I believe that marketing and revenue cycle need to be different sides of the same coin.
Yeah.
Your revenue cycle management, your effectiveness at that ultimately determines how scalable your business is, which is what marketing is there to do, is to create scaling opportunity to drive new business, into the business. But what you want to drive is profitable business, right? You want to drive uncomplicated business, right? And this is where I see so much off target and marketing campaigns is driving in lower paying, high complexity payers. The patient comes with a payer attached to them who's going to pay the bill, right?
Yeah.
And what you want are high paying, low complexity financial patients, right? There's lots more that goes into that in terms of diagnosis mix and plan of care lengths and all this other stuff too. But, just today we're just trying to establish the fact that the present state of data in our industry is inadequate. We're trying to solve that problem by creating an opportunity to convert the things you already do into data. Doesn't matter whether you do your own billing in-house, we can support that. If you're not satisfied with your outcomes from an outsourced billing partner, we could take a look at that. But the evolution that our industry needs to go through needs to start from a much better foundation of the right data so that you could understand. We're in a position to telepractice. What's a normal number of patient registration errors? What's a normal number of verification of benefits issues? What's a normal number of clinical documentation not supporting medical necessity? What's normal? Perfect is not normal, right? Now, there will never be perfect. There will always be some degree of errors and things that create complexities. But you want to get down to, the levels. Our most optimized clients have revenue risks and claims issues at the 3% of all of their claims level. Our least optimized, most complicated, out of control clients have numbers in the 70 to 80% range. It is absolutely mind-boggling that the same business, same specialty, same functions, in one hand can be super optimized and dialed in and create just incredible outcomes. And in another instance, it's just completely out of control and broken. And that's what we're trying to fix.
Yeah. And thank you for letting me be part of the conversation today.
You are welcome. All right. Well, thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob.